Now, throughout the entire Brexit referendum, and indeed the past 4 years, the Brexiteers were screaming that they hated unelected bureaucrats unelected bureaucrats taking positions of power that would they would be unable to get rid of. And this is apparently the reason why they hated so much and loathed the dreaded European Council, because they apparently couldn't get rid of them. They actually could. They just never wanted to, because they knew they wouldn't succeed in being able to getting rid of them. Because, there are mechanisms for getting rid of them, but let's face it, their reasons for, quote, wanting to get rid of them would have never passed the European Parliament. So, what has happened only just a couple of days ago is, out of nowhere, David Frost is now back on the scene and has been put in a position of power. Now, many of you who've watched this channel before know that I am actually okay with this, in a way. Because I've said before, if a party gets into power and then, let's say, doesn't have someone who is maybe experienced enough in maybe the justice system, defence, banking, whatever, and need a background in that area, I would be fine if the government decided to go out and say, we are going to get this guy in and he's going to take this cabinet position, but he's not going to have a vote. Not only that, I would be even more okay with it if they went and put it as a vote before Parliament. We want this guy in because we need his expertise. I would be fine with that. But of course, that's not what happened. And indeed, by the sounds of it, this has upset a lot of people in Boris's own cabinet. So we're going to have to see how this plays out in the coming weeks. But nevertheless, the fact that David Frost is back in charge echoes the point of what I've been saying for a while now, is that this government is going to make every effort it can to try and prove that Brexit is some sort of a success and start treating the European Union as if it doesn't exist, as if it shouldn't have to deal with it. And David Frost being there is a prime example of that. So, before we jump into today's article, please do remember to hit that like and share button. And of course, down below there are links to my Patreon page and a One Off donation link. And thank you very much to those people who do support the channel that way. So, on with this. So, this comes from The Guardian. And the title is, How David Frost's Dizzying Ascent of the Greasy Pole Has Damaged Britain. Every revolution evaporates and leaves behind only the slime of a new bureaucracy, said Franz Kafka. Britain's Brexit revolution is evaporating now and leaving behind the slime of David Frost. The most damaging criticism of the Brexit that Frost negotiated is that not one industry or trade can say that, however how greatly others are suffering. At least they are benefiting from being outside the EU. Even fishermen and women whose precarious lives were exploited with such cynicism by Nigel and Boris are finding that they must fill 71 pages of paperwork to export just one lorry of fish, as new bureaucracy extends to every fishing village in the land. Yet, while the country suffers, no one has done better than Frost. His rise mirrors Britain's fall. At the time of the Brexit referendum, he was just Mr. David Frost. He went to Oxford University, but left no impression. His tutor told Prospect magazine they had fond memories of Frost's, quote, brilliant tutorial partner, who went on to be a professor. But the man who was to impose the hardest of Brexits, the man whose name will be forever associated with the narrowing of millions of horizons, I remember nothing at all about him. Frost moved from Oxford to the Foreign Office when he became a figure familiar in many workplaces, the frustrated middle manager, who represented an indifferent world that overlooked him and gnawed at his pride. He did not underestimate the anger, however, do not underestimate the anger of men no one remembers. Frost became Britain's ambassador to Denmark. It was a decent job. Who wouldn't enjoy free board and lodging in the smart Copenhagen home? But it was not a serious job, as a senior Conservative politician put it to me. The most sensitive task at the embassy is managing relations between Britain and the Danish armed forces, and that is dealt with and by the defence attaché. Frost was going nowhere. John Kerr, a former head of the diplomatic civil service, described his former staffer as being very diligent and conscientious, but good at carrying out instructions. Not always as good as at querying instructions. Kerr didn't mean that as a compliment. And Frost became a director of strategy at the Foreign Office and a director for Europe at the business department. Good job once again, but again, not serious jobs. Not permanent secretary ambassador to the UN, however. He went and quit in 2013 to join the Scottish Whisky Association, and that appeared to be that. A civil service colleague who was at his leaving party told me he had a chip on his shoulder about not being promoted. I'll say it was definitely right of centre at the time that he wasn't a hardcore Brexiteer. But then neither was Boris Johnson. For Frost, like Johnson, Brexit was an opportunity, a beginning of a flash of hither come smiles at the Tory right after the referendum. In the piece for The Telegraph, he said, "We must stop flapping about Brexit and realise this, quote, great country would be successful whatever we do." These were odd statements for the chief executive of the Scottish Whisky Association, yanking the UK out of the single market, and was to kick the whisky business along with so many other businesses. But for an ex-diplomat with frustrated ambitions, vacuous boasterism, and it was a complete smart career move. When Keir said Frost was not always good at querying instructions, he was describing every man or woman who has climbed the hierarchy being strung up by the boss. Johnson recognised a useful servant and called him in. He took to greeting him as Frosty, telling everyone within earshot that he was his new pal and banter buddy, ready to play and get along with the great game of Brexit. In 2016, then the Foreign Secretary, Johnson made Frost his special advisor. In 2020, he turned to Frosty and former Mr. David Frost into Baron Frost of Alton in the county of Derbyshire, at the extraordinary breach of constitutional principle that a government advisor should not have such a seat in legislature. Last week, Baron Frost shapeshifted again as Johnson elevated him to the rank of cabinet minister with responsibility for dealing with the EU. For years, Liberals have warned about the danger of politicians corrupting the independence of the civil service. The inexhaustible rise of David Frost is a lesson to us. It shows there are civil servants who want to be politicised so that they yearn to become politicians, as long as they do not have to stand for election in the process. His cabinet post may work out for him, but it will not work out for the rest of us. I can predict with certainty, because the hard Brexit deal he negotiated was a disaster, and crucially, a disaster on its own terms. Frost went into negotiations saying the EU did not understand the nationalists were sweeping Europe. The UK was not prepared to compromise, that we were a free and sovereign country, and that Brussels had better get used to it. Frost played hardball by persuading Johnson to threaten to break international law. He only made the EU hit back harder, though. It demanded the UK adhere to labour and environmental state aid laws, or else a weak and meek Britain accepted. Brexit, the most onerous level playing field terms the EU has demanded, the government's former trade officer David Heggie told me, even communist China got a better deal. But does Frosty actually realise it? I asked this because last week his friends were briefing political correspondents that he would take an assertive role over the border in the Irish Sea, and that he and other defenders of the nation state agreed to as they petitioned the actual nation state of the UK. Does he not see how he will fail again? Does he not realise that Brexit left the UK isolated and deluded, and choking in a level of paperwork that can only be described as Kafkaesque? Perhaps all he sees now is all well and done. But Mr. Frosty to Frosty to Baron to Cabinet Frost member, Frost is in one hell of a rise. Not a bad lad for whose political career seemed over in 2013, and not great for anyone else. And that is, that is where we are, unfortunately, now. And I think he's going to do some incredible damage in the coming months. And as we have seen from former, cabinet ministers in Boris Johnson's time, he will do whatever he wants and able to basically get away with it. And that's the worrying thing. Again, this is because the Tories have such a large majority. So, for example, as the Brexiteers have said that they want to ditch the Northern Ireland Protocol completely, Frost may go through with that. And Johnson may well do so as well if he sees it as a viable political strategy and a political move for him. He may very well do that. And that will cause huge problems, because that is then breaking another international law, and Britain will become a complete international pariah. So, and that is, to be honest, that's the worst case scenario. The best case scenario is that Frost does nothing. However, as was said there, this is a man with clear ambition who wants to leave a mark. And that is incredibly worrying, because what's worse than a man who has ambition but no idea at all? I mean, it says it all from his former Oxford professor, who far more fondly remembers his research partner than Frost himself. So, as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do remember to hit that like and share button. And of course, down below there is a link to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link. And as always, thank you very much to those people who do support me that way. And we'll see you all next time.